Anytime a female is in the mix, it changes the dynamic. It changes the way that boys and men show up. They posture, they cower a little bit, that they're not as bold, they're not as assertive, they're not as competitive. And it's not entirely bad in the appropriate context, but when it comes to building a rite of passage, we cannot allow a woman into the mix because she's going to change the dynamic. And that is not a slight against women. As a father of three boys, I know how challenging and difficult it can be to help usher our young men into manhood and couple the complexity and the challenge and the struggles of ushering them into manhood with the idea that culture and society don't really want you to. In fact, much of culture and society, from government to education to academia and the medical community, would love nothing more than for your young men to be perpetual little boys or inferior women. It is our job as their fathers, as men of neighborhoods and communities, to raise these boys, to usher them into manhood, and to make these boys into men who will be our future leaders, who will be our future protectors, who will provide for themselves and for their communities and their loved ones. And unless you can figure out a way to do that effectively, they will be inundated with academia, with government, and with the medical challenges, the messaging, the propaganda that would love nothing more, again, than to keep them sedated as who they are or who they have the potential to become. So today I want to talk with you about 8 tips that you can incorporate when it comes to raising your boys into men. This is for fathers, and this one is actually also for single mothers. We have a lot of single mothers who listen, who realize that they cannot fully help turn their boys into men. And so they tune into this for information, resources, guidance, direction, instruction. And so whether you're a father of boys or a single mother of boys, I hope this one applies to you. And please take this for what it is. I'm not going to give you the exact thing that you should do for a rite of passage. I'm going to give you 8 factors or 8 considerations when it comes to building these rites of passages, because I don't know your boys. I know they're boys. I know they have a set of characteristics and patterns and behaviors that generally make them young men and eventually grown men, but I don't know them specifically. And so I'm going to give you 8 things that you can incorporate, and then it's up to you to be creative in how you implement it. Let's get right into it. Number 1 is there has to be some level of separation. Guys, if you don't have a level of separation from women, from their sisters, from their mommies, from their grandmamas, from their aunties, this is not going to be effective. Okay, I've done this long enough that I know, and I've worked with young men in groups and individually long enough where I know that anytime a female is in the mix, it changes the dynamic. It changes the way that boys and men show up. They posture, they cower a little bit, that they're not as bold, they're not as assertive, they're not as competitive, and they just change. And it's not entirely bad in the appropriate context, but when it comes to building a rite of passage, we cannot allow a woman into the mix because she's going to change the dynamic. And that is not a slight against women. That is not me saying I hate women or there's no value that women add. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that when women are there with boys and with men, we change. And so in a rite of passage environment, we have to separate them from mommy and sissy and grandmama and auntie and whoever else might be there and get them around other men and other boys. That's it. That is a hardline stance that I have because everything else is going to just not be as effective if there's a woman involved. And not to mention that women are naturally going to want to nurture. They're going to want to coddle. They're going to want to protect. They're going to want to preserve. Ladies, I love you, but you have to stay out of it in this case and let the men be men, the boys be boys, and let the men turn the boys into men. A great example of this is even in sports situations. When I was coaching my son's teams, I would have women who would sit on the sideline with me and they would like rub their kids' shoulders during breaks and halftime. It's like, don't do that. I'm their coach. I'm the man. They're the boy. Let me handle this. When they get home and they've got ouchies and boo-boos and everything, you can do whatever you want. You can give them a little massage. You can give them an Epsom bath salt thing. You can put Flintstone Band-Aids on them. You can do whatever you want. But when they're in the environment, let the men take care of it. Okay? All right. Number 2, there has to be an element of challenge. Okay? If there's no challenge involved in the situation, then there's nothing that's going to be hard, difficult, challenging. There's no adversary, there's no adversity, and they're not going to have to push as hard as they might need to. They're going to be able to coast and take it easy. And that's typically life. That's not a rite of passage. That's just life. Life is easy. Academia is easy. The government would have it easy for you. Most of what our kids deal with is they didn't get the latest edition of their PlayStation game downloaded in time. That stuff's easy. There needs to be challenge involved. And when we think about how this used to happen hundreds, if not thousands of years ago, the boys would be separated from their moms, from the tribe. They would be put under a challenge. There would be risk involved. They'd go out and they'd have to kill the saber-toothed tiger or steal the egg from the bald eagle nest, the pterodactyl nest, and come back, show they did it. And then the men would mark them. They'd tattoo them. They'd circumcise them. They'd brand them in some way. They'd have a ceremony, and then they would bring them back to the village, and now they're men. It's the same principle. Now, some of those things have changed, but it's the exact same principle. So there has to be an element of challenge built into your rite of passage. There also, point number 3, has to be an element of risk. If there's no risk involved, there's no reward. There's no reason to rise up to the challenge. And I'm not saying you have to put them in situations where they may physically injure themselves or they may get themselves killed. You know, if I were to say, hey, kids, I want you to run across the I-15 at the busiest time of the day and see if you can make it, that has nothing to do with the rite of passage. Sure, we could say it's risky, but it doesn't really speak to point number 4, and that has to have purpose. It has to have significance. It has to have meaning behind it. So there has to be an element of risk. And then there has to be point number 4 is there has to be some purpose behind it. Okay, so what is the purpose? Well, the purpose changes based on their age. And there isn't one rite of passage that you as a man should do. There's multiple, maybe even infinite rites of passage. I typically, just as a way of looking at it, look at 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18. Easy for me to remember. And those are all really pivotal moments for boys anyways. When they get to be 8, they're turning from a young boy into a young man. When they get to 10, now they're starting to be on the upper echelons of elementary school, maybe even moving in to middle school. At 12 years old, maybe a little sooner, they're starting to go through puberty and hormones are changing. At 14, they're already into puberty. And they're moving from these little snot-nosed kids into men. And you can see it by the way that they develop. They start to sprout. They lose their baby fat. They start building muscle. They start bucking the system at home a little bit. At 16, they start driving, a lot more independence. They're going to challenge you as men. They're not going to be pushed around by their mother. And then at 18, eventually, the idea culturally is that they're out on their own and they're not subject to your rules and the way you do things anymore. And if you do this right, this is how it will work. So those are pivotal moments in their lives, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18. And I would highly suggest that you follow that, but it has to have an element of risk. And based on, again, point number 4, depending on where they are, you might have different conversations. At 8 years old, you might talk about them learning to have some responsibility now around the house and around the community. Before they're 8, they don't have responsibility. I mean, maybe they have to clean up their room. They have to go to bed on time. Maybe have them do some basic chores around the house, but really they don't have any responsibility. But at 8 years old, they can start doing more things around the house. They can start spending time with you as a man. They can learn how to change the tire on your truck or change the oil. They can help mow the lawn. They can pull weeds. They can weed whack. They can do all of these things if you involve them in that process. At 10 or 12, you might start talking about the birds and the bees. Where do babies come from? How are babies made? What is the function of men and women's genitalia? You might be able to have that conversation. At 14, or maybe even earlier, you better start talking to them about not being alone with the young ladies, because now their hormones are coursing through their veins. At 16, you can talk to them about getting a job, having responsibility, having their own finances, getting them a bank account. At 18, you might talk about them being out on their own. What does it mean to be responsible for rent and a car payment and insurance? But based on where they are in life, it needs to have meaning. So if I tell my kids, hey, run across the I-15 at 5:30 in the afternoon, yeah, that's a risk, but it doesn't really line up with their growth as men. So it has to have meaning to it. Number 5, there has to be some sort of honoring. So if it's not hard, it's not worth honoring. This is the participation trophy conundrum, where if you just show up, we give you a trophy. What do you have a trophy for? What did you do for showing up? You did nothing. You literally did nothing. You got to practice 90% of the time on time. Congratulations. Mom or daddy got you to practice on time, but you didn't do anything that you deserve credit or acknowledgement for. So when a young man goes through the separation from what's comfortable, namely the women, he goes through challenge, he has risk, there's meaning involved. Now, once he's completed that, you have to honor him. And that could be a certificate. That could be a trophy. That could be a memento. I remember as my boys turn 8, we go on a camping trip, and then they get a little lion figurine. They actually get 2 lion figurines, a lion cub and a fully grown adult lion. And it's a signifier for the growth that they've had from cub to lion, or the growth that they're trying to accomplish. There's things, little mementos, little memories, little treasures, little awards that they receive. Also, another thing, when my kids turn 8, my boys, when they go through that rite of passage, they get their first knife and they get their first firearms. And then we start driving. There's a whole curriculum I have for this, and maybe I'll share more of that later. But the point is that there has to be some sort of honoring their achievement, because they've actually achieved, not because they showed up, but because they actually achieved. All right, number 6, celebration. Now, this is where you start to maybe involve the women again. This is where you start to involve people of the community, other men, neighborhood, family members, etc., where you might acknowledge them publicly. It's not enough to give them a little memento and say, here's your first pocket knife. You now have to acknowledge them publicly in front of everybody else. So maybe that's a family dinner and you just want to say, hey, I just want to say something real quick. If I could have everybody's attention. Little Timmy, he's 8 years old. He just completed phase 1 of his rites of passage. And these are the things that he did. This is what he accomplished. This is how hard he worked. This is how he feels about himself. And this is what he was awarded as a memory and a memento for what he did. And I want to acknowledge that little Timmy is no longer little Timmy. His name is now Tim. That's what we need to do. He's not Timmy anymore. He's Tim. And if you look at what cultures have done throughout human history, is that when the boy goes out and he steals the pterodactyl egg and he comes back and brings it to the tribe, he's no longer a boy, he's now a man. And he has a seat at the man's table. So little Timmy no longer sits with all of the cousins who are 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. He gets a different table. See, we have to acknowledge this and we have to celebrate it publicly, because we need to show everybody else as an example of what could be. And we have to acknowledge little Tim, not Timmy, little Tim, for what he's been able to accomplish and what he should be proud of. Number 7, there needs to be some sort of a marking. Okay, now I'm not saying that you have to circumcise your kid if you haven't circumcised yet. I'm not saying that he needs to get a tattoo at 8 or 10 or 12 years old. I'm not saying you need to brand him like they would do on Yellowstone. I'm not saying that. Okay, but there needs to be a marking. And that goes back to the little memento, the treasure, the item that little Tim has now at this point to help him remember, oh, yeah, that's who I am. And that has meaning and significance to me. And he better hold on to that forever because it does have meaning and significance. But there needs to be some sort of marking. Another way to quote unquote mark one of your children is to create, and this is going to roll into my next point, number 8, a slogan or a mantra or a token or a password or something along those lines where nobody else knows. No one else knows. So as Michlers, we have our motto. No one else knows what it is. Not the women, not their sister, not their mom, not their aunties, not their grandmas. No one. Me and the boys know what the motto is. That's it. It's not to keep secrets. It's not to exclude anybody. It's just to let them know that you are now part of an exclusive club of Michler men. Not everybody gets an invite. Not everybody is welcome to come. And if we give them that password, then we know they've passed what they need to pass to prove to us that they're worthy of being in our circle. This is exclusivity. And this is the marking that I think all men should incorporate with their boys where no one else knows. This is not sensitive information. Some people are going to take this out of context and say this leaves the door open for perversion or secrets. That's not at all what I'm saying. And I think all of you are capable of discerning that. I'm saying have some exclusivity with your boys. And then number 9, we talked a little bit about this in the ceremony process or the celebration process, is that you reintroduce them as a man. They're new now. There's a great movie, The Three Ninjas, I think is what it's called. I love this kid. Love the show as a kid when I was growing up. And my kids love this movie. And the whole premise is that these 3 boys had a single mother. Oh, I guess she wasn't a single mother, but their dad was largely absent because of some work. I think he was in the FBI. And so they spent the summers with their grandfather. And their grandfather was a martial arts expert, and he taught them the way of martial arts. And one summer, the boys went to stay with their grandpa, and he gave them all new names. And that's how they knew that they went through what they needed to go through. They got their new names, and they were very proud of their new names and meant something and had significance and meaning. And then they reintroduced them to their mom, brought them back into the village, and then allowed them to take their training, their expertise, their knowledge, their know-how, their new wisdom, and implement it in school. Implement it with their family, implement it with themselves to keep themselves safe. Three Ninjas is a really good movie for, I would say, boys under the age of maybe 12-ish or so. Anything older than that might not find as much interest, but that's a good movie for 12 to maybe 6, 7, 8 years old. Go check it out, Three Ninjas. That's my recommendation for the day. But at some point, you need to reintroduce them, but you reintroduce them differently. Okay, little Timmy is not coming back as little Timmy. And we don't want people to start treating little Timmy as they were before. Now, mom has to treat him differently. Now he has to carry himself differently. Now you're going to hold him more responsible because he has greater responsibility. That's the whole point of this. It's the maturing of young men. It's the growing up of young men. It's them developing and building and getting better and getting smarter and wiser and able to impact their lives and the lives of the people they care about even greater. That's what needs to be included in a rite of passage. There should be no question about those 9 things. I'll recap them here in a minute so you can write them down, and I suggest that you do. And then I want you to be creative. It could be a camp out. It could be a hike. It could be a long trip. It could be even a staycation. It could be something with other men involved, other men and their boys involved. But you got to get outside. You got to implement these things. You got to create the danger and the risk within reason and help these boys turn into men. Society's not going to do it. Like most schools, they're not even giving failing grades anymore. Like society's not going to do it. The institutions that were rite of passages before, like the military, like sports, like Boy Scouts, those are going away. This is not going to happen just because it is. Like you actually have to be deliberate and intentional about it. And I think you can, and I think you should. And I'm doing this in my boys' life. So let's talk about this. So initiating boys into manhood. So point number one is separation, again, from the women. No women involved. Number two, challenge. It has to be challenging. It has to be hard. It can't be easy. It has to be hard based on their current skill level. Number three, there has to be risk involved. Not risk that they'll die, but risk that they might not complete it. Literally, they may not be able to complete it. And if they don't, then you have to do it in 30 days or 60 or 90 days again. Number four, there has to be meaning and significance again. You're not going to just put them in harm's way just for the sake of putting them in harm's way. It has to have meaning and purpose behind it. Number five, you're going to honor them. You're going to acknowledge their achievements. Number six, you're going to celebrate with everybody. It's a celebration. It's a ceremony. Bar mitzvah is one that we often see. And that's a great example of what a rite of passage might be. Number seven, there has to be a marking. I'm not talking about a tattoo or circumcision or branding, but maybe it's a memento. Maybe they earned a knife or a gun or the motto that we talked about. It has to be exclusive, and that's the motto, right? It's only for Michler men. It's only for Wilson boys. It's only for Thompson guys. You get it. And then number nine is only when they've completed it do we reintroduce them. Maybe that's a new name. Timothy now becomes Tim. Joe becomes, maybe you have a nickname. Maybe he's earned a nickname, and that's what the family recognizes and acknowledges him as. I promise you, this stuff sounds cheesy, but I'm telling you, it's not cheesy, and it means something to boys. It means something to men. And that's what we want it to be. And that's how we raise our boys. So this is not a one-time thing. This is again, at a minimum, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18 before they become capable of going out on their own, but they've learned everything they need to learn as men. If you guys have any other questions, I've got some curriculums and some ideas. In fact, I'm putting together a course on the programs that need to be initiated at 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, and 18. And I'll get you some details on that. It's going to be at orderofman.com/initiation, orderofman.com/initiation. I'll get you those details so you can have that. For now, get signed up to our newsletter at orderofman.com. Follow me at Ryan Michler on Instagram for more information, and let's keep getting after it. But guys, we'll be back next week. Until then, go out there, take action, initiate your boys, and become the man you are meant to be.